Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to episode 3 of Youth Strong. To join with me today, I have guest speaker Trent and Sheikh Saddique. But before we get into today's episode, I owe you all an apology. We said today was going to be about the Bosnian episode, and due to unforeseen circumstances, we have to postpone that episode. However, I would like to emphasize Bosnia and what happened 25 years ago. That atrocity, that tragedy should still be remembered, and we plan, inshallah, to do our best to bring back that topic in future episodes in the near future. But I would like to, even though I'm not an expert in the subject, I would like to remind us of some information that happened back then. We, the Muslim community, have a responsibility to research and find out this information. Sorry, can I please get the... Okay. In 1995, 10,000 Bosnian Muslims fled the Bosnian Serb offensive. It was put under siege. Srebrenica was a UN safe zone, one that had been established since 1993. And the Bosnian Serbs saw this territory only as a strategic positioning for the conflict. Those forces put pressure on the safehold, creating an unbearable living condition. And by July, they had taken over the town. The Bosnian Muslims were forced to give up their weapons in exchange for peace. But on July 12th, men, both young and old, were taken by the army. 8,372. 8,372 people were killed as vengeance against the Muslims from the 13th to the 16th in July. The same year, those forces began the process of finding graves and hiding the evidence. And to this day, although the government has apologized for their crime, they deny the existence of this genocide. Bosnia continues to suffer today, and it is our responsibility to reach out and help in whatever way we can. And again, I do apologize for us not being able to cover that topic today, but inshallah, in the near future, we will get to it. But for today, allow me to introduce our guests and let us discuss a sensitive and a close-at-home topic. With me, I have Trent and Sheikh Saddique. Can you guys just tell me a bit about your guys' background?
Please go.
Okay. My name is Trent Delay. Assalamu alaikum. I am one of the VPs for the Alberta Muslim Public Affairs Council, and I currently am sitting on the City of Edmonton's Anti-Racism Advisory Committee.
And my name is Sheikh Saddique Pathan. I'm Outreach Imam of the Rashid Mosque. Also, I'm the Outreach Liaison for Islamic Relief Canada, and that's my role here.
Thank you both of you guys for joining us on such short notice. Inshallah, we'll try and keep it brief today, but it is an important topic. Unfortunately, in this past weekend, there was an incident within our city. We're this very mosque we were live streaming from. Actually, we're in the basement of the masjid. Upstairs, on our front entrance, there was an act of vandalism. This, I know, has been covered by several news articles. And on screen right now, I will have with me the demonstration. As you can see on the left-hand side in purple spray paint, and on the right-hand side, there's also purple spray paint. We won't dive into what these symbols represent today, or what they come from, but rather we'll just talk about the act itself, defacing the masjid, and how it affects us as a community. So, Sheikh Saddique, you actually had a chance to speak to the news today, and you mentioned several important comments to them. One of them was that this action was to bring about an animosity within groups, like it was hate fuel. Can you please elaborate on what you spoke about?
Sure. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala ashrafil alameen. Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. When we saw the symbols that were etched out in the front of the entrance of the Al-Rashid Mosque, I think all of us woke up with, again, this heavy weight in our chest and our disappointment in that, again, we have to deal with these messages that we're not wanted, or somehow there are people who would like us to be portrayed or seen as the other. And this is something that, is not new. Any community or any group that's singled out tends to have these stages of where discrimination sort of elevates and to even more and more sort of intrusive sort of forms of discrimination, which ultimately can lead to the worst form, which is violence.
Yes.
So for me, watching this, initially there are words, initially there are gestures. The next stage is defamation of sacred places.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, as you said, we obviously don't know exactly those folks who are responsible for this, but we do know that these things are there to sow animosity and division and to make us be seen as, or make us want to be uncomfortable in our skin and in our place that we are in Edmonton. And I don't want any of my young sisters or my young brothers or my uncles, aunts, grandparents, my children, I don't want any one of us to think of ourselves as any less or unwanted or unaccepted. We do have to start explaining to our children now
Yes.
what these symbols mean.
Yes. Trent, you also deal with the issues of others or divide within different groups. Do you think it's as Sheikh Saddique says?
It definitely, when places of worship or important culturally significant places get vandalized, it reverberates throughout those communities. And symbols and performances like this can add to an ongoing sense of hatred and division. So
Yeah.
I would agree. I see this, even if it was something that wasn't intended to be hateful, which, you know, it's also, they've defaced a place of worship.
Yeah.
So it's taken it a step further than just graffiti under a bridge. This is, they knew that this place was significant, and they also knew that it would be seen.
Yeah. I think there's a popular saying that symbols are only as powerful as you make them, right? So we as a Muslim, or as a Muslim community, we give the mosque a certain status. It's not just a building, it's Baytullah, right? Can you explain to me what the status of the mosque is within the community, Sheikh Saddique?
So, you know, for us, we know the mosque to be a safe space for us. It's
Yeah.
a spiritual place where we get together as a community, as families, our children, again, our grandparents, all intergenerational.
Yeah.
So one aspect of it is very much spiritual. But there is the other aspect, which is community-based and community sort of driven and social-based.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about uniting and connecting people that otherwise it's very difficult to, you know, connect with. So it's a place of connection. And it's a place where people find their sense of belonging. And I would say, though, unequivocally, that these symbols are hate-driven. And we got to call a spade a spade. And I'm not going to dance around the reality. We've, for far too long, and I can say that living in Edmonton, being part of this mosque, we have always tried to minimize these gestures. But now we're seeing a momentum of increased targeting where those symbols are not coincidental. And no longer, and I definitely agree with Trent's analysis as well. But I would just like to add that I don't think this to be for a moment without intent of trying to drive some hate-driven message. And I don't think we need to second-guess that.
Yeah.
You know, there's a reason why those symbols were chosen. They were there to certainly, you know, give a narrative. If that was the sole intention or not, that's something else. However, that to me is quite clear.
So Trent, Sheikh Saddique is telling us that this was meant to incite hate. I think now the reaction as a community, maybe as individuals and also as a community, is very important, right? Is it okay for me to be like, it's not a big deal, I'll just ignore it? Or should I go up in arms and like search down, hunt down these people and fight them?
No, I would say definitely not. Leave it to the authorities to do that research. But I think that as a whole, our Muslim community here in Canada, here in Alberta, here in Edmonton, need to familiarize themselves with symbols of hatred.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like if you look up the Anti-Defamation League's website, you can see a lot of these symbols. That's where I looked right away when I saw some of these numbers and letters and trying to figure out, okay, well, you know, what are they trying to say here? And one of the reasons why some groups use these subtle symbols is so that they have that plausible deniability. You're like, hey, this group uses this symbol, and they're like, no, that's just numbers.
Yeah.
You know, because they want to be able to make us look like we're crazy, to
Yeah.
gaslight a community.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we should take every incident seriously, because what if this is going to be the guys wearing their robes? What if this is whatever, you know? We
Yeah.
don't know. So we have to take it seriously, because, you know, New Zealand is a very recent memory, and we don't want that to happen to us.
Yes. So, like, I think this comes back to an answer we were saying education is very fundamental, very important, right? And in my experience, just like looking at the internet comments, I've noticed quite a bit of speculation, all right? And I think speculation can be dangerous because it sets people on an assumption in which they can falsely act. They can overreact or underreact, right? But it's quite unfortunate to say our community is not readily or easily willing to search, like dive into those resources if they don't come out from a sheikh. I know you're a sheikh, and like a lot of burden is put onto the sheikh, the shuyukh. Should they just give Islamic messages, or should they be able to tell people about these websites?
I think that it needs to be a combination. You know, we cannot separate Islam from each one of our identities.
Yeah.
However, you know, at the khutbah, we have to talk about what happened to George Floyd. We have to bring a local Edmonton context onto these symbols of racism and hatred, because what happened to George Floyd happens to Indigenous and Black people here in Edmonton.
Yeah.
So we cannot just wipe away these issues and ignore them as, oh no, it's an American problem. But look, a mosque in Edmonton just got spray painted. You know, there's people that when they get stopped by transit police, they get seriously injured, and I am fine. You know, there are people who, when they see a school resource officer, they feel fear.
Yeah.
So we have to talk about these things and bring an Edmonton context into that, and that requires our religious leaders to guide us in some of that dialogue.
Yeah.
So you can't separate it.
To change and alter these stigmas is definitely not the sole responsibility of a single individual. It has to be a team effort coming from many different forces, whether it's like our grassroots movement, the shuyukh, or professionals in different fields, right? However, people, like, when we approach this, we're like on different pages sometimes, right? How do you think we can unify ourselves so that we like actually solve a problem rather than just beat around the bush?
Oh, we have to put Islam first. You know, everybody comes from different cultural backgrounds. Every one of us in this room has a different skin tone, but that is not important. What's important is you put your faith first and you put your community first. And, you know, we can't have these divisions which, when we're too busy fighting amongst ourselves, we're never going to solve these bigger problems. And we need to stand up for our Jewish brothers and sisters with anti-Semitism. We need to stand up with the current discourse with COVID-19 and xenophobia. There's a lot of people that, you know, their model minority status is being challenged, or they're finding themselves where they once were accepted are now an outsider. And some others have been outsiders from the moment they set foot here, whether they were born here or immigrated here. So we need to stand up and be in solidarity with these bigger movements. We need to be more visible. You know, that's what I think.
What are your thoughts, Sheikh Saddique?
Oh, I think Trent said it wonderfully as well. I mean, I think, can you repeat the question once again, just to make sure I understand the question?
Okay, so you can obviously digress if you will, if you wish, but I think to bring about change or a paradigm shift within the community, to change stigma, it requires not the efforts of one individual,
Right.
but rather many different leaders, grassroots individuals,
Okay.
business professionals.
Gotcha.
Sheikh, how can we?
Yeah, thank you. I think as Trent said, we are driven by an understanding from our example on our faith. But to get to that point, we have to be clear about how those messages relate to ourselves intimately. So for example, when we talk about the verse, when we say, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the most noble amongst you is the one who has taqwa, or who has piety or mindfulness of God at all times. I sort of gotta internalize, what does that mean for me? You know, this whole idea of being stigmatized because of color, it's a two-way street. We got some stuff to clean up in our own house, and that's the reality. So we gotta also address what's happening on the outside, what's going on outside. You know, as a person of color within any group, there's different layers of experiences. So one of the things that I've mentioned even in an interview with CBC was, you have a huge population who are visible minorities who have been victimized due to racism and discrimination. And if the mosque is then seen as an alienated place, where now we have become once more stigmatized, this is something that we'll have to look at. Also, it's not the Muslim community has to move from blanket statements. My suffering as a person of color may be very different than, let's say, Trent's experience as, let's say, a person, let's say, of his background, or somebody from a Somalian background, or somebody from a Lebanese background, somebody from a female background or a male background. All of our experiences are going to be different. So at some point, we're going to have that discussion to better equip ourselves in understanding how best to address this as well. So there's a lot of internal growth that needs to happen. In addition to what Trent was saying as well, we need to partner with various groups. I love what we were saying, civic organizations. I think it's an excellent point he made. Excellent point about uniting faith, of course, but we have other allies that we connect to. We have excellent groups, especially with the BLM, Black Lives Matter movement right now. It's incumbent on us right now to reach out to the African Center, to the African Women Society in Edmonton, and these particular groups, also the indigenous groups, as my man Trent was mentioning. But again, there has to be involvement of the government as well. Furthermore to that, we got to go back to grassroots education again. We got to start the conversations in coffee shops. We have to start the conversations in our homes. We have to be ambassadors. Nobody needs to be a sheikh to start the conversation. The conversation's about really being brave enough to start talking about this and having a safe space for all of us to communicate.
I see. Do you have thoughts on the matter?
Well, I'm in full agreement. At the end of the day, these issues affect so many different groups from different backgrounds. Like how many people in this room have done an indigenous blanket ceremony? That's a very big part of, we are all settlers here unless we're indigenous, and we need to understand the context. And when our kids go to school here, they learn however old the current curriculum is and whatever is in there that may need to be updated. I never, in my education in Alberta, I don't recall learning much about Islam. But as a city here in Edmonton, the visible minority as a term is no longer accurate, because I'm certain by the next census we'll have a population in Edmonton where the white population is now the minority. We have now a racialized community here, and we have many people, like over 6% of the population here is indigenous. We have a huge Muslim community here in Edmonton, and so we need to learn how to ensure that those voices are reflected in the education our children consume and in the media that we see and how we're represented on TV or on the internet.
I see. That's a great point you brought up about the media and what we consume. Actually, we will touch on that in a bit down the line. But circling back to what we initially spoke about, the graffiti, do you guys think this is just the tip of the iceberg? And also, is there, sorry to phrase it this way, but isn't there some sense of irony that because earlier when we were speaking about racial discriminations and the BLM, I'm talking earlier as in weeks ago, it was apparent that some of our own community members were feeling anxious to come to the masjid because of other Muslims. But now all of Muslims are feeling anxious to come to the masjid for their safety because of the graffiti incidents. What are your thoughts on this matter?
So, Trent, did you want to answer that first, or?
I can try to dive into it.
We'll dive into it.
Yeah.
I'll join in a minute.
It kind of reflects to the point where you're saying, shouldn't we fix our own house? So do we fix our own house, then reach out to other parties, or can we reach out to other parties even though we know we have our own issues?
Well, the masjid should be a safe place for everybody.
Yeah.
That's the intention of a masjid. It's a place for community. It's a place for people to worship Allah and to be part of that community. It's a physical representation. Your masjid could be your home. Your masjid could be a prayer mat on the side of the highway. But having that physical space is a symbol of a community. and it's a building block for our schools, for the children that take car keys as they run through the prayer hall. You know, like it's a huge thing it's a symbol, and we need to make that a safe space.
Yes.
We do. At the same time, you know, like I remember when the New Zealand shooting happened, I remember feeling a wave of fear of like going to Jummah.
Yeah.
You know, it was like a pain of, you know, where's the next one going to happen? Because these roots of these problems have not been addressed by those in power. So is a masjid safe? Maybe, maybe not, but it needs to be safe for everybody.
Yes.
And yeah, I would add, as I was referring to earlier, inna akramakum indallahi atqakum, we'll go back to that message over and over again, because that's our balance, our sort of reminder as well, that the one who is most righteous is the one, or the one who is most noble before God is the one who's mindful of God. Now, having this, first, I guess you had a few questions in there. That's why I was trying to sift through it.
Yeah.
Because the first question you had asked was, do we think that this is going to happen again?
Move the iceberg.
I mean, I have, unfortunately, I'm a realist, and I'm an optimist on the one hand, but I'm very much aware of the pattern of what we're seeing, both, nationally, south of the border and globally. We're definitely seeing a rise of these xenophobic and Islamophobic attacks. And for us to be naive to think that by sending roses alone is going to be the only way in building bridges or addressing issues, I think is short-sighted.
Okay.
It is one aspect that we need to do is to reach out to those communities that want to genuinely engage. The other side of it is truly doing what I know Trent and AMPAC and a lot of the anti-racism sort of initiatives are about, and that is, going to the front lines, educating people. But then also we have to deal with the issue of law enforcement, social media, and all of these avenues and areas where people are chatting and talking and thinking that, we have to remember symbols and words, they have power.
Yes.
And something that could be very unintended can spawn a movement or some sort of uniting aspect that wasn't even intended initially. It doesn't make it that any more less dangerous. So, for me, I have a very uneasy feeling of the pattern that we're going through. I mean, I had to talk to my son after the last New Zealand thing and this terrible massacre. I had to sit him down and say, son, you got to watch out what's going on. I had to have the conversation.
That is a tough
I'm living
conversation.
in Edmonton, dude. I'm living in this city. You're living in this city. And I can't believe that the stories that I heard my parents talk about, living as a minority in India and being subjugated to discrimination and murders, that all of a sudden that narrative had to be shared here. It never was even I couldn't fathom it. And there I was having a conversation. We're back into a serious discussion. Are we to overreact? No. Because ultimately, we believe al-qadr, al-qada al-qadr, the judgment from Allah, what is this destined for us, what is written for us, is from Allah.
Yes.
وَلَنْ يُصِيبَنَا إِلَّا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَنَا. And nothing will harm us except, or befall upon us, except that which Allah has written for us. So we have that as well. We're not worried about that aspect of it. At the same time, there's the human part of it. And in terms of, where we go from, of how do we do things, do we do it concurrently or not? I mean, I think, it has to be done in concurrent, has to be done at the same time.
Yes. So, working on both fronts simultaneously, right? So the name of this show, is Youth Strong. So while a lot of work needs to be done, I would like to hone in particularly on what youth, as in younger individuals, you young people watching at home, what you can do, like practical steps that you can take to help bring this conversation more prominence, bring it to the forefront of the coffee table talks, and what they can do to inform or start this paradigm shift we need to go through as a community. So do you have any particular advice, Trent, to give to the young individuals out there when it comes to tackling these issues?
Well, I've spoken to a lot of youth in various roles, and I've heard kids say that in their junior high or high school that other kids will make fun of them and call them like the terrorists, or they'll say Allahu Akbar in a very mocking way.
Yes.
And when incidents like that occur in your high school, be it your teacher or a fellow student, say, why is that funny? Call out the microaggression or the blatant act of Islamophobia. Call it out. Say, why is it funny?
Yeah.
And we need to be comfortable identifying these issues.
So being docile is not an option?
I think that in order to protect our community, we have to be able to confront it. And we need to teach our youth the tools to be able to confront that in a way that will keep them safe.
Yes.
And we also need to recognize other communities' pain. Right now, there's a CFL team based in Edmonton, whose name I'm not going to say, because it's a slur. It's equivalent to the N-word attacking the Inuit community. And there's a debate right now on whether they should change their name. They should absolutely change their name.
Yes.
That shouldn't be a debate. It's like, could you imagine a team making fun of Muslims, like in the name, like a derogatory slur directed at Muslims? Because I've argued with some brothers about this. They think it's not a big deal because they're big CFL fans.
Yeah.
But these words and these symbols have power.
Yes.
And no community should be a tokenized mockery, and we need to recognize that in other communities, and we also need to recognize it within our own. We shouldn't allow people to do that so that we can bury our heads in the sand and be model minorities or whatever it may be. We need to take back some of that power, and that requires us to call it out.
Yes.
And so this CFL team and other examples, very present in our media and our social media, we need to support these communities and support our own.
Sheikh Saddique, your insight on this matter?
I think our youth are amazing. I mean, they're creative. You guys are that representation of that. I mean, got my lovely sister sitting there. I got my brothers here. I mean, you guys are truly the epitome of what I see in the youth. A lot of it is turning back to the youth and having the conversation of what strengths do you guys have? What are your ideas? A lot of it is going back to the young folks and saying, well, what are you guys doing and how you dealing with it? I would actually, give the youth greater credit in the fact that they probably have a lot of these strengths and abilities in dealing with it because they've been dealing with it. That's what I know. I know I dealt with my share of it. I told my daughter of my experiences in junior high, and I told them it was one of the toughest years of my life. But I believe the young people now are way better way stronger than I was. My hat's off to you. You see more girls. Hats off to our young sisters, our young daughters wearing hijab, our brothers outwardly expressing their Islam. I mean, this is a phenomenally equipped youth generation. And this is the woke generation. Apparently there's a wrong woke that is a part of this conversation that we'll leave for later on. So the one thing is, I think we got to turn them back to going back to the youth and listening to them. Talking to them, not about them, talking to them, and really getting at what's working for them. Second part is, draw on our heroes. Man, we have a lot of heroes. We've had people championing, Muslims championing, social and civic rights within the United States of America, of Canada, of this local city. We have amazing young women and men, and we have seniors, leaders in our community that have fought the fight, and they have great skills that we can draw upon. So we got to draw on that. We got to really bring that and hone it together and say, you know what, we do got our heroes. I mean, Malcolm X is an eternal example of that, of trying to be that role model for us. We need to also, look at, when it comes to the conversation of experiences, is talking to these other folks. I actually want to talk and openly engage with some of these kids that might have anti-Muslim views, because I think that's going to be part of the solution as well. We have to get down to where they're at. A lot of the issues are mental health. A lot of the issues are ignorance. A lot of the issues are prejudices based on one or two bad experiences. Maybe we can be part of the solution for them as well. So that's what I would add to that.
Thank you for that insight, Sheikh Saddique. As you know, that is part of the mission actually of this entire program, Youth Strong. We want to be a platform to have that dialogue with other youths. And we're working towards, inshallah, growing our show and having more youths involved. As a matter of fact, we'll have some youths on in just under a minute. Our next segment, we dive into social media. And I want to circle back to that point because this is something you yourself, Trent, deal with and work with quite often. So what is the power of social media? When we consume the content, how does that influence us? And what can we do and how utilize our social media to make change? Or is social media just an entire fluff thing that does not take action? Let's dive in and discuss these points with our two sisters, Samaya and Maryam. Please welcome them onto the screen. And Sheikh Saddique and I will be taking an aside. So you can go ahead and please grab this chair. It's a bit awkward. Everyone on the live will be watching, but thank you very much.
I feel like I'm gonna fall off the chair.
Let's light it up, bro. Trying to see you.
Good.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Sumaya.
And I'm Maryam.
And today we're going to be talking about being fake woke.
So what does it mean to be woke?
So to be woke is being knowledgeable on like all the social injustices going around. But the term fake woke comes from people that like to pretend like to post on social media about maybe an event that they don't actually know much about, or maybe act in a way that goes against what they're posting.
It is is it really enough to be woke because other people decided to be?
So
So ask Trent a question. Like, he works in social media. Do you actually think social media is an impetus of change?
Yes.
So go ahead and
But as you said, like the fake woke culture, I would say another term I've seen used to describe a similar thing is people who are using social media as a performative lens.
Yeah.
You know, if you attended the rally in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, in solidarity for those that have died because of police violence, racialized violence, 15,000 people went. But there's a local activist named Bashir Muhammad, part of the Somali community. He's been fighting for these same issues in Edmonton for years without any acknowledgement for the most part. And recently, there was many people that had originally been part of the Justice for Amel. He was a little boy who wore a durag to school and was accused of having a gang affiliation for wearing a durag. And Bashir was able to fight that for over 9 months and got an apology from the Catholic School Board. But that took 9 months, and Bashir acknowledged that at some points it was just him and one other person going to rallies. But then 15,000 people went to that big rally. And then we had the hearings with the City of Edmonton on racism. 140 people attended that public hearing, most of them youth. And then the Edmonton Public School Board had a hearing to address school resource officers. 41 people attended. So now we went big number and we're coming back down. So was it performative for some people? Probably,
And that brings me back to my point about being fake woke. Is it necessarily enough to only draw attention to situations and struggles of minorities when it is trending? Is it enough to just be knowledgeable, or do you need more than just that?
No, you need to do more than that. This information has been available for a long time. Just because now in the COVID environment, and because there's so much attention via the media, I don't think that's good enough. We need to be working on our own internal biases. If your skin color is lighter, look at me, I'm a white Muslim. So my experiences are not your experience. They're not Brother Akil's experience. We need to acknowledge these, and we need to see where these roots are coming from in the system. And that is not just us post on social media. It's not just turning your profile picture black for one day. This is somebody's life or death struggle. And it requires for us to do some reading, to confront people, to confront our parents even, saying, hey, you know, like when they say something ignorant, like, oh, you know, that person's better at basketball because of their skin color. You're like, no, that's not acceptable. That's something that actually arose from slavery around assuming that somebody's skin tone meant they're more physically stronger so that you can justify their enslavement. You know, we need to have these conversations with the people that are leading the dialogue, and that is often, you know, the older people.
So some people argue that if you're just posting and you're not actually knowledgeable about it, then, like, for example, even the black screen for the Black Lives Matter movement, some people were saying that it doesn't do anything. Do you think posting in general does something? Like, even if they're just posting and don't really actually care about it?
I think the intent needs to be there. I'm not going to say that posting alone won't do anything, because we have to consider that there's some people that have differing levels of ability, and that their activism might be posting online. They might not have the physical capabilities to go to a protest or to go out and talk to people. You know, we don't know what these people's backgrounds are. However, we need to have the right intent. If you're sharing an image and you don't understand what it is, you know, I saw politicians sharing white nationalist memes, you know, and they're like, oh no, I didn't know that was that. But he should have, right? You should have known what it was before you posted it. The onus shouldn't be on black and indigenous people or racialized communities to point out, hey, actually you're sharing something that is very racist. You should have known that before you put it on your social media. So I think the intent and the knowledge needs to be the individual onus.
Mm-hmm. How would you define social justice?
It's kind of hard to dilute such a complicated subject, but for me, I believe that there's a moral imperative to stand up against injustice. I believe that we shouldn't celebrate people who call themselves allies. You know, if you're a white ally, you know, all the power to you, but you don't need a fancy title to do the right thing. You know, like there's people that do this work, the anti-racism work, because that's a skin they were born into. They don't have a choice. So we need to acknowledge that when we're supporting communities different than our own, that we need to do it because it's the right thing to do. So social justice, you know, it's a moral imperative to do the right thing and to speak up for those who may not have a voice.
So speaking on when you were saying for some people their only ability to fight against issues is on social media, like, you know, that might be all they're capable of doing right now. Would you say Instagram is a good source of info?
You know, it can be. It can also be a sense of propaganda and disinformation. I mean, do you guys know who runs Instagram? Facebook owns it. Do you know Facebook's being criticized right now for allowing political advertisements and supporting fake news? So, you know, what you see on social media might not be the truth. You know, there are people that use social media to spread lies about Islam and lies about different racialized communities. So we need to take that information from social media, and we also need to back it up and research it and verify. We can't just take it at face value. So it can be a powerful tool for both information and disinformation.
What's your standpoint on cancel culture?
Cancel culture?
Yeah.
I think, you know, cancel culture has always existed. It's not a new thing. You know, I don't think that, you know, like if you're saying something that's absolutely derogatory and racist, it's not the community's fault for you having to be removed from your position. You know, if you don't want to be canceled, why are you saying something racist? You know, it's not the community's fault for canceling you or whatever you want to label it. You know, people shouldn't abuse their position to be able to use their platform and humiliate people or to say derogatory and racist things. So, you know, you call it cancel culture, but this has existed before. And, you know, it's a consequence. You know, people like to talk about the right to free speech, but first of all, we don't have free speech in Canada. We have restrictions. You can't have hate speech. So if you can't have hate speech, then we don't have free speech. And if we do have conditional or limited free speech, that doesn't protect you from consequences. You can say what you want, but if it's racist and derogatory and you get fired over it, then maybe you shouldn't have said it.
Speaking on cancel culture, but do you think it can tend to be a little bit toxic? Because sometimes people will bring up things from like way in someone's past, like maybe when they were a lot younger, even a teenager, and we'll be like, you know what, you're canceled, and like nobody should support him, no one, whatever. Shouldn't we believe in educating people?
Sure, you know, like, and this is complicated, right? Most of the people in this room, I'd imagine, identify as Muslim. Every time you say Surah Fatiha, you say Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. So if Allah Ta'ala is the most merciful, then we should subscribe ourselves to being merciful in all of our interactions. And that includes with the people that may wish us harm. And you know, forgiveness is a complicated thing, but forgiveness is healing for both you and for them. Myself, you know, I've in the past held ideals that I would be opposed to and fight against right now. So everybody is capable of changing, but that has to be within themselves, and they have to take ownership and they have to acknowledge their past. And if somebody is trying to erase what harm they've done, I believe that does need to be addressed to those communities, even if it's an apology.
Sorry for that, we're having some technical difficulties. But for the youth, how do you think we should get them involved with being actually woke and not just doing it because of the majority?
Well, I think youth need to take volunteer positions. You know, your activism, your solo activism via Instagram or TikTok. You know, I'm not familiar with TikTok, but I've seen lots of people are onto that now. I just got onto Twitter recently. So, you know, like there's platforms that are very valuable. Some people in the community have tens, hundreds of thousands of followers, and that's incredible. But we also need to volunteer with our masjid, like Al Rashid, or we need to volunteer with civic service agencies. You know, if you want to volunteer with AMPAC, that's always an option for people. I'd be happy to introduce people to that. You know, we need to get youth involved with the policymakers, with the legislators, with the people that hold power. We need people to be comfortable speaking to CBC or speaking to an MLA. You know, to understanding this is where you go when you have this problem. And we need to have youth represented at these big tables. You know, when I walk in the room and some of the anti-racism stuff that I do, sometimes I'm the only Muslim in the room, and I'm a white guy. So I'm just like, what the hell? You know, like you're choosing me when, you know, like there's a Somali woman whose voice goes unheard. You know, and we need to make sure that we're making space at these places of power for our community members and our youth. So I think youth need to be involved with these organizations, and these organizations in turn have to make space. It goes hand in hand.
What are some ways that we could help encourage the youth to be a part of fixing this issue?
Well, you know, youth are part of this issue. Youth are represented in the criminal justice system. Youth are represented in issues of whether it be a hate crime or in your school. Like if you too, in your experiences, even if it was small, I'm sure have both experienced a microaggression or somebody pointing at your hijab or staring at you a little bit differently, you know, treating you differently on a bus or a public place. And that's heartbreaking to me that you've had that experience. But if you speak up about it, you talk about that experience, then hopefully other people will add their voices to that growing knowledge, right? We need to make sure that people are aware. And I think the social consciousness right now is very supportive to these dialogues. And I have hope that youth will be the change makers. And hopefully that people, myself included and older, can help mentor the youth to one day take the reins of power, to have a young person become mayor as a Somali woman who wears hijab, or someone to take a elected official or to be appointed to the Anti-Racism Advisory Committee. There's a lot of different areas we need to see youth involved in.
Okay, so one more question. So you guys use social media on a daily basis, but you have habits, right? How do you change these habits to become, like, do you unfollow memes and start following social media pages?
Yeah, so do you have any any advice for the youth? Like, let's say me, myself, I use a lot of social media. Like, I'm always on Twitter, Instagram, all those kind of stuff. And a lot of times it's mainly funny things, but like, I get all of my news sources from these pages. What would you suggest would be like a way that, like, for example, me personally could, or like, and I know a lot of other people are like this, where they use a lot of social media, but they don't really know how to get like active, or like, you know, don't know what to follow, don't know what would you suggest?
So like in regards to like, you get your information, but it's like, where do you go
Yeah,
next?
where do we go? Like, what's like even like, so you know how we brought up, is Instagram trustworthy? Like, what is a trustworthy thing? I know nothing's really completely trustworthy, but like, what would be a good source of information for me to?
Well, I think a good start would be for youth to familiarize themselves with who are holding the seats of power, you know, in Edmonton. Like, who's the Edmonton Public School Board? Well, who's your city councillor? Like, do you know who your city councillor is?
No.
So if you guys wanted to complain about something, you wouldn't know who to complain to. Do you know who your MLA is? Your MP?
No.
No? So, you know, for example, do you know how old, you know, like, do you know how old people are when they're put on the no-fly list?
No.
So Canada has a no-fly list. So to try and prevent terrorists from flying, right? There was a newborn baby that was put on the no-fly list. And if that doesn't outrage you, I would be shocked. You know, there's a toddler that's still on the no-fly list, and they can't really get them off right now. They're working on it. So when young babies have been put on a no-fly list, who do you complain to? Well, you've got to talk to your MP, right? And I think it's important for youth to know, where do we take these issues? We have this outrage, we have this energy, but how do we get involved with these processes? You know, with the Edmonton Public School Board, like, do you guys go to Edmonton Public Schools?
Yeah.
So you guys go to Edmonton Public Schools. Do you have a school resource officer in your school?
Yes.
Yeah? And does that make you feel comfortable?
Not necessarily.
No? So you could have had your voice be heard with the people that are in charge of it. You know, the Edmonton Public School Board, you could have spoke at that hearing had you known where to go. But that hearing will be taking place again on September 8th, and perhaps your voice could be heard then. So learning where to go with this passion that you have for making the community a better place, you have all the energy, you just need to direct it. So knowing the organizations or the elected officials that you can go to is very important.
Definitely.
All right, thanks.
Thank you so much for your time and for answering our questions.
We have a little present for you.
From our sponsor, Shama Arisa.
Thank you.
Can you just open it?
Oh, yep.
She's like a youth creator. The whole point of this is to support youth.
Okay, yeah, so she's a youth creator. So this is like has some small sudas in there. So if you guys would like to support her, we have her page on the side. She's youth.
Tune in next week. That's all right.
And tune in next week.